Hello, everyone. Welcome today. I'm really excited about our session today. My name is Edwin Hill, and I am with Sisters in Crime. I'm the head of the education team. We put on these monthly webinars. Today, we're going to be talking about romantic suspense, and we're going to be learning about how to turn up the heat in your writing. I'm going to be your moderator today, as well as doing the technology stuff. So let me just walk through a few basics of Crowdcast before we get started. So first, a little bit about Sisters in Crime. Sisters in Crime is the only organization of its kind, an international society of writers, readers, agents, editors, publicists, librarians, bookstore owners, and other people who support a unique mission to promote the ongoing advancement, recognition, and professional development of women crime writers. To learn more about Sisters in Crime and the many ways we support our members across the globe and at the chapter level, please visit sistersincrime.org. If you go to the bottom of your screen and you click on the author information button, you will get to the Sisters in Crime website. We're using Crowdcast today, and when we're using Crowdcast, the best browser to use is Google Chrome, followed by Firefox. If you're using one of these two browsers and are still experiencing technical problems, try two things. First, click the Get Audio Video Help in the lower left corner of your screen, or click the Help button at the top right of your screen and click on Compatibility Mode. I always have trouble saying that, compatibility mode. Okay, to ask a question. So we'll be talking for a little while with our three authors, but if you would like to ask one of them a question, click on the button at the bottom of your screen that says Ask a Question. And you can enter the question in there. If your question needs immediate comment or clarification, I'll try to bring it up if I can. If not, I'll hold everything till the end of the session for a Q&A portion. If you have comments, just put them in the comment box on the right-hand side of your screen. Just remember that there's no privacy in Crowdcast, so anything you write in the comment box, everyone else can see. Let's get started. So the first author that I'm going to introduce is Mary Burton. Mary, let me actually bring all of our authors up so I'm not the only one here. There we go. So Mary Burton is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of over 40 romance and suspense novels, as well as 5 novellas. She currently lives in Virginia with her husband and 3 miniature dachshunds. I love dogs. So Mary, I'm going to start by asking you a question. For anyone who is new to romantic suspense, can you tell us some of the elements of the genre and what readers expect of it?
Well, I think when a reader comes to romantic suspense, the romance, they're looking for the romance and the mystery. And romance readers are typically looking, they're looking for all the moments within the romance and that kind of happily ever after or happy for now at the end. And the suspense readers, they're looking for the mystery element. And so they want that resolution of the mystery at the end. So it's sort of like you're blending, romance kind of brings that sense of hope at the end, and the suspense brings that sense of justice at the end. So I think you've got to kind of weave those two together. And I think a lot of readers like it when there's a push-pull between the romance and the suspense, meaning they have a tendency to complicate each other. It doesn't really suit that these two are getting closer. There's a serial killer coming, there's a mystery to be solved. And so you have to kind of, it's braiding two plots together. They don't run side by side, but they are braided together. So I think that's what readers are looking for, that sense of hope and justice at the end after a ride of lots of moments that keep them turning the pages.
I like that idea of the sense of hope and justice. So probably not too many morally ambiguous endings in romantic suspense.
Well, no, that's genre fiction.
Yeah.
I think mystery writers want that murder caught at the end, and that's great. Romance readers want that couple to get together. So people are coming to the genre looking for that. I think looking for that sense of resolution at the end.
So we'll talk a little bit more during this hour about how those two parts of the story are braided together, the romance and the mystery aspect. So Alexandra Ivy is our second author. Alexandra is the New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of romance, suspense, paranormal, and erotic romance. She has also written Regency historicals under the name Deborah Raleigh. A five-time Romantic Times Book Award finalist, Ivy has received much acclaim for her Guardians of Eternity, Aries Security, Immortal Rogues, and Sentinel series. She lives with her family in Missouri and can be found online at www.alexandraivy.com. I'll put everyone's website in the chat today, and you can also get to anyone's website through the author information button. So Alexandra, you write in a number of genres. What attracts you to romantic suspense in particular, and what draws you back to romantic suspense, especially when you've worked on a novel in a different genre?
I was actually writing suspense long before I knew I was writing suspense. I mean, my historicals, every one of them had some kind of subplot of, of suspense, of danger. Certainly my paranormals always have some kind of world ending, mystery or suspense happening in it. So before I even started writing suspense, I was writing suspense, but it is nice to go from genre to genre because it's almost like a palate cleanser for me. So when I'm writing my paranormals, they're funnier, they're lighter, they're quicker. Obviously, they have a different tone to them than the darker suspense. And so when I'm done with the suspense, I'm done with the suspense for
Yeah.
a little while, So it's really nice to be able to hop into something. And I always think about it in terms of music. So like my paranormal is kind of a punk music, and then my suspense is more of a hard rock. My Regencies were on Mozart. So, it's like changing channels on a radio station is
Oh,
how
that's so fun. Yeah.
yeah, so that I can go from one, and then I'm ready to go back in when I'm done with my next book. I'm ready to change back.
Cool. Oh, good. Well, we'll get more into your writing process later in the session as well. So our third author is Katie Richards. Katie was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. suburbs and divides her time between Maryland and Toronto, Canada. She earned a law degree and worked as an attorney and legal writing instructor for 15 years before returning to her first love of writing fiction. Her short story, What Lies Inside, appears in the Amazon bestselling anthology Festive Mayhem. Her debut novel, Pursuit of the Truth, Book One in the West Investigation series, was just released on February 1st. Congratulations, Katie. So, question for you, Katie. Your first novel, just Pursuit of Truth, just came out a couple of weeks ago. Tell us a little bit about the book and what drew you to writing romantic suspense in particular.
Well, the book is about a woman who's just inherited her hotel chain from her family's hotel chain, and a series of weird, slightly dangerous events start to befall. And with the help of the head of her security, they seek out who is targeting her. And so I started writing romantic suspense because that's what I read. So I felt very comfortable in that genre, and I like the mystery, I like the romance. They work very well together. I think going back to the conversation about suspense, there's suspense in both romance and sort of the traditional mystery, right? Will they or won't they in the romance, even though generally at the end of a romance we know they will, but it's getting there, right? That's suspenseful. How will they get together? And then on the mystery side, which maybe appeals to me as a lawyer, seeing justice done and the bad guy is caught and all is well with the world, at least for a little while, until the next book. So
nice. Cool. Well, congratulations on having your first book come out. That is so exciting. So you've kind of touched on this, all three of you so far, but let's kind of talk about developing a story in the genre. Mary touched on this, but Alexandra, why don't you start with this? My impression is that romance and suspense are equally important in this genre. What are some tips for developing them together so that they feed off each other as the story progresses?
Right. Most of the time, I come up with the suspense plot first. I have an idea of who I almost always come up with the bad guy first. I don't I guess I'm a bad guy lover, whatever, but that's who I come up with first. So I have kind of an idea of the suspense part of it and that motivation. And then I, like Mary said, I try to go complete opposite with the romance so that they're knocking against each other. So they're in the pursuit of the suspense, but I'm building my couple to have their own difficulties because of the suspense, or they're
Hmm.
brought together because of the suspense, one or the other, but then they build on each other. And so that's how I try to look at it, is as I'm building them together like a mountain, as we're going up a mountain and they're both going up at the same time, so that the resolution can happen at the same time. So
Hmm.
um, like I said, it's not always. Sometimes I come up with the couple first, but a lot of times I come up with the suspense first, because for me, suspense is a lot more difficult to write
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
than anything else I've even historicals or anything else I've ever written. And I think it's the complexity of having the romance and the suspense, play against each other.
Cool. So Katie, how about you? As you started your novels, how did you marry the two parts of the story?
Well, generally, I do start with the suspense plot first. Um, it, with Pursuit of the Truth, it was a little bit different. I knew Nadia just sort of popped into my head, and I knew exactly who she was and what she was going to do, and this was the character for this book. But in most cases, like Alexandra, I need to know the bad guy. I need to know why he's doing what he's doing. I need to know how it's going to end. I can't start the book unless I know how he's going to be caught.
Yeah.
So that's where I start, and then I start building from there. So now that I've figured out who my bad guy is, I need a nice, strong. Usually, I start with a female heroine first. I need to figure out who she is and how she's going to thwart the bad guy, and
Hmm.
then who's going to be her love interest, and how is he going to contribute
Oh,
to
great.
that. And I try to balance them. If she's a businesswoman, and she's not going to know, maybe not going to know a lot about how to do background checks or anything about shooting a gun, right? Then the male main character is going to have a job where that makes sense, where he can complement that, because it just doesn't seem. I don't like it when all of a sudden this woman who's a postmaster just knows how to shoot a AK-47 and make a bomb. It's not. I don't know how to make that work. Maybe a better writer can do that, but I don't know how to make that work.
Yeah, yeah,
So
that's cool. Yeah.
I try to have them complement each other.
Well, and we'll talk about sort of like the three elements that you're talking about, sort of the bad guy, the protagonist, and the love interest. We'll sort of get into each of those three parts later in the conversation. So, Mary, what do you have to add to this? How do you approach this when you're writing?
Well, and I also try to think about the balance of romance and suspense, because you mentioned they're equally balanced, and sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. Um, some publishers would prefer, or readers prefer, that it's more 70% romance and 30% suspense, and they don't want dark and gritty suspense. Other publishers want it exactly the other way. So I think as you're going into this, and figuring out what your blend is going to be, kind of get an idea of, is it going to be romance heavy? Is it going to be 50-50, or is it going to be more suspense heavy? So knowing that will help a lot. And that's knowing your markets and knowing, who you're targeting.
Hmm. Let me dig in on that a little bit. If you're a new writer and you're coming into romantic suspense for the first time, how would you approach figuring out that balance, and knowing which publishers to target, what your audience is expecting from you? Are there any techniques that new writers could use?
Well, I first, focus on what you like to read, because chances are that blend is going to work for you when you're writing. And when I wrote my first single title romantic suspense, it was a lot of moving parts for me, because and I started to lose track of, did I have enough suspense? Did I have enough romance? So I put a 20 grid, a 20 square grid up on my wall. So each row, five squares per row, and each block represented a chapter. And I wrote on sticky notes, if it was romance, I put the plot in blue, and if it was suspense, I wrote it in yellow. And then I was able to step back and look at the whole thing and get a sense of, okay, it's balanced, it's too heavy here. And since then, I've kind of learned to kind of get a feel for it. But at the time, you know, it's kind of getting, you kind of get lost in it because it's a big project at first. So that kind of putting it up on the wall and looking at it that way helped me a lot get through the first.
So is it scene by scene? So like this scene is a romantic scene and this scene is a suspense scene? Is that how you?
Yeah, each square was a chapter. And,
Oh, a chapter. Okay.
And within each chapter, there might be 2 or 3 scenes. And if the scene was suspense dominant, it would be the yellow. And if it was romance dominant, it would be, I think it would be, it was blue or pink. I can't remember. But they were 2 different, it gave me a visual cue to see how the book was balancing out. And I could see, once I did that and stepped back, I could see I had a whole chunk that was just all suspense, and I'd almost dropped the romance. So I realized I had to go back in and rewrite and move some scenes around and kind of balance it out.
Oh, nice. Oh, great. Alexandra, how do you approach this?
I'm like Mary. I have to have a visual. So I have a whiteboard, and I have the town. I have little. I used to do cutouts. Now I just do little magnets of where people are, because it's not just a story. It's not just a suspense. It's knowing that I have 5 potential suspects. So all 5 of those at all times have to be capable of committing a crime. So I have to know where those 5 people are at all times as I'm moving through the story. And so I started doing, like, I have everything. I have it on my whiteboard. I have timelines. I have timelines for the past, the future, you know. So like right now I'm handling a story that has a past killer and a future killer. So I have both of those timelines on different walls. So, but I'm like Mary, I have to have a visual, and I still do. I still have to have a visual cue to see where I'm at. Otherwise, I'm just lost.
Yep. I have a past killer and a present killer in my current book too, and I'm always lost. So I should try.
I was like, and I get halfway. I'm halfway in the book, and I'm like, who thought this was a good idea?
I know.
So, Alexandra, is there a specific balance that you look for as far as like 30% romance, 70% suspense, or anything like that?
I started off with very first romantic suspense that I did was very much a romance. So it was very heavy romance.
Yeah.
And so I just had suspense was kind of the backdrop. But as I've moved into each book is just progressively more. And I've noticed that they've even stopped putting the romantic suspense on it. Now they're just kind of like just putting suspense label on it because it just, every book has just got less and less and less. So
yeah. So Katie, what techniques do you use for balancing romance and suspense?
We're going to be unanimous here. I use the stickies and the corkboard. I need to see it too. I'm a visual learner, so I put my little stickies on. I use the different colors to show me if it's a romance heavy scene versus a suspense heavy scene. Try to balance it out, and then I have a little notation for because I do multiple POVs. Point of views. So I have a little notation for whose point of view it is, and so it's a whole thing.
So when you do multiple point of views in a romance, who tends to have the point of view? It would be your protagonist, but who else?
Oh, the villain, definitely for me.
It's gonna.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes, yeah.
So sometimes the villain.
No, I agree. Sometimes the villain. It's either 2 or 3 views is what I use. It'll be the villain, the female main character, a female protagonist, and the male protagonist.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes the villain doesn't get his own point of view. Sometimes he does. It kind of depends on the story.
Nice. Oh, cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about the protagonist. When we were prepping for this yesterday, we talked a lot about the rise of the strong heroine, which sounded very exciting to me. So I wondered if we could talk about what you're looking for in what you look for when you're developing a brand new heroine. And if anyone has used the same heroine in a series, that would be interesting to hear about too. But let's start with Mary on this one. When you're starting a brand new heroine, what do you look for in that character? What do you want to bring to the page for that character? Are things that readers expect?
The first thing I look for with her is her character flaw. I want to know why she's not where she needs to be. Because usually something, whatever got them, the coping mechanism that got them to the beginning of the book might be the very mechanism that will ruin them or not enable them to solve the crime or escape the killer. They've got to fix whatever that is, or at least deal with it. Mm-hmm. So I try to think about what's holding this person back. What kind of fear or belief or something that's just not right for them. And once I have that in mind, that starts to help me figure the plot, because my whole goal is to dig into that character flaw. Mm-hmm. I try to start with the character flaw.
What's an example of a character flaw that you've used recently, especially when it comes to these strong heroine, the rise of the strong heroine?
My book that came out in the fall, Burn You Twice, is the killer is an arsonist, and the heroine had survived a fire he'd set 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and she's technically moved on from it, but she hasn't. And so when the man that was arrested for the crime is released from prison, she knows she's got to go back and face him again, because she's convinced he's going to set more fires. So she could, if she chose not to face that guy, there'd be no book. It forces her to fix things in herself that maybe she just has tried to ignore for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So that was the most recent. She's become an arson investigator, but she is terrified of fires.
Okay. Oh, that sounds great. Yeah. So, Katie, when you're developing a new heroine for a book, what do you look to? How do you start?
I try to figure out what her unrealized strength is. So maybe the opposite of Mary, right? What strength does she have that she doesn't realize she has, that she's going to have to tap into in order to persevere over whatever the obstacle in this story is. So that's it's the opposite of the flaw, but in a way it is the flaw as well, right? The flaw is that she does not see that she has this particular trait, and she's going to have to use it.
So in the book that just came out, your debut, what was the strength that you focused on for that character?
So she's been pummeled. Nadia, her name is Nadia. She's kind of been pummeled in the last year by her father passed away, then her brother passed away in quick succession. Her fiance broke up with her, so she's kind of been battered, and she's had to take over the hotel chain when she would rather sort of be in the background and not be the face of it. But she's all that's left, so she steps up. And so she has to realize that, she has the courage to do this, to be the face of this chain, to be in charge, to run this hotel. And as we move forward, to dig into her family's past, to find out why these series of events are happening to her and why she's now being targeted.
Ah, interesting. Oh, cool. So Alexandra, I'm gonna do a little bit of a twist, a different take on this question. Since you write in so many different genres, and this is sort of playing off a question that one of the people in the audience asked. So the person in the audience asked, "What differences do you see between romance in a thriller and romance in romantic suspense?" So, kind of thinking about the different genres that you write in. how does when you're talking about the heroine of a romantic a romantic suspense novel, how does that protagonist differ than from some of the protagonists in your other novels, especially thrillers?
I I think the one in the suspense I make just ordinary as I am. So because I would like to think that if something happened that I would step up and be extraordinary, So, I like them to be a vet or a nurse or and then when the time comes, they step up and are much bigger than they thought that they could be or much more badass. In my paranormals, they almost always start off as badasses. So, they get to be a vampire or werewolf which is super fun because then they can be extreme in their, So I like to read a book and visualize a very normal person like me being able to do something extraordinary. But I also like to read about the kick-ass leather wearing vampire who can, take it all on.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
cool.
get both.
Cool. So let's stay with you, Alexandra, and talk a little bit about the love interest. So we have our protagonist, and then the second part of this triangle is the love interest. What do you like to bring into when you're developing a love interest? What do you like to bring into that part of the story?
I like I I I think probably not the opposite, but whatever her weakness is, where she's so he can be that part, but not and it has changed. I'm probably the old person here, so it has developed over the years of what the hero is. And so
Oh,
he's no
do
longer
tell us how it's changed. I think that's really interesting.
so I mean, I started at 98 when I came in, so super old. When the hero was, swooped in, the
Yeah.
woman got to do something, but the hero very much was the hero. And so it definitely has changed where my heroine now, he gets to be her partner, but he doesn't solve the crime. She can be the person who solves the crime. She can be the cop. She can be the detective. She can be, the person who is. So, but I do like to have them complement each other in some way. He brings something to the relationship that she's been searching for, or that she just enjoys. That she enjoys being with him.
So like in a modern romantic suspense, like I always think of, do you remember Romancing the Stone, that movie?
Hmm.
Yeah.
So like I remember at the end of that movie, there's a certain level of disappointment because the heroine would sort of like relinquish the story to to the hero almost. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious, in like a modern romantic suspense, does the does the does the heroine sort of drive the suspense of the end of the story in a way that she didn't in the past? Does the hero wind up relinquishing some of the suspense to the heroine?
I think so. I mean, I in mine definitely, and even since I've been writing, it's changed. I mean, you can go back when I started reading them, where she was just kind of along for the ride. I mean,
Hmm.
that's all she was there for. And now, my heroine, I deliberately give her, like Mary was saying, the whatever she needs in the end to overcome to solve this crime. So I look at her very much as the driving force.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Mary, when you're
I
developing,
always start.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Katie. Yep.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I always start the book thinking about how is she going to get herself out of this,
Uh-huh.
because she will not be saved. I'm
Uh-huh.
not. I won't write it so that he just swoops in and she's tied up and he saves her. So she has to get herself out of the situation first, and then the hero can come in and he can slap the cuffs on the guy and haul him off to jail. But she's already controlled the situation. She's got herself out of the warehouse or whatever the
Yep.
particular harmful situation is.
Oh, good, good. So so Katie, just when you're developing your hero, or when you're developing the love interest, sorry, what qualities do you look for in the love interest, and what do your readers look for in that hero?
And I think he has to be, they still look for some of the traditional strong, attractive hero. And I mentioned before, I like them to complement. So whatever sort of her flaws are won't be his, and whatever his flaws are will be her strengths. So that they need to complement each other. They both need to be intelligent. They both need to be capable. I have no problem with having her save him as well. Maybe that's not the penultimate or the ultimate the climax of the book, but somewhere in there they need to butt heads, and they need to be each other's equals, right? That's what I'm trying to do.
Cool, good. So Mary, anything to add about your heroes? What you look, or sorry, not heroes, I'm using the wrong term, love interest.
Yeah, they typically often they challenge the heroine for me. He's just like one more irritant. They don't start off necessarily attracted to one another. He's getting in the way of her investigation. He's slowing her down. But by the end of the book, she's done most of her saving. But I think it takes them both just to finish the book and to solve the crime. They each need the other. Again, that's that braiding of the romance and the suspense. At the end, she saved herself, but if he hadn't shown up when he did, she might have still been recaptured, whatever. But they worked together. I like that kind of partnership, that total blending at the end of, if we hadn't met each other, we wouldn't have survived this.
Nice, good. I'm just looking through the questions from the audience members, and I'm just going to try and ask a couple of them. So do any of you use any electronic digital methods? Mary's work method was great. Mary or other panelists, do you ever use digital methods instead of Post-its or cards?
The only
I use both.
digital. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's a little bit of a lag.
It's okay.
Welcome to online crowdcast.
No, I use both. When I'm in the outlining stage, I just open up a Word document and use the outline feature in Word to outline sort of where things are going. But then as I start writing, as I think Mary mentioned, it's sometimes you get confused and where are you and what happened and how much romance have I written versus suspense. And that's when I need to see what I've done and where I'm going. So about halfway through, I'll probably end up putting them post-it notes up to make sure I'm headed in the right direction and I haven't totally screwed it up.
Cool. Anyone else?
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, I was going to say the only digital trick I've learned in the last 2 years, I started having, and this is at the end phase of the book, I have the computer read the book back to me now. And I can hear the problems sometimes when I have a tendency to skim over them when I read. So I have now, every book now, I will have the computer read it back to me 2 or 3 times. And it's helped me catch a lot of the inconsistencies, like, oh, that name changed or this changed, or helps me really tighten it up. So that's kind of an in-game technique, but it's been really effective.
I find that very useful as well. It really helps you find errors and like word echoes and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Alexandra, how about you?
Just to emphasize my oldness, I actually write longhand. So I write the first draft longhand. So no digital, but I do like with Mary at the very end, I do a word search because I have a favorite word of each book. And it's either grimaced or bitter lip, and I don't know why, but each book has their own word that is used like 70 times. And so sometimes I'll do a word search. And it's like, well,
I have a list of them.
People grimacing all over the place. So.
Yeah.
That's about the only thing I do, though.
I
Everything
love
else,
it when you find one of those during page proofs, but
yeah,
yes.
yeah, those are really fun then.
Cool. Okay, one more question. There are lots of great. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. There are lots of great questions down in the questions and answers. So, folks, feel free to add more. But this, I thought this was kind of interesting. And Katie, why don't you answer first? I'm writing my first romantic suspense with a male protagonist. I've written 5 other romantic suspense novels with female as lead. What do the panel members think of that? Obstacles? Are there obstacles to writing with a male protagonist?
Well, that might actually be better for one of the more experienced
Sure.
writers
Yeah.
than me.
Alexandra, you write in many genres. How about you?
I do. I wouldn't think it would make a difference either way. You know, I think the pro, unless it's just specifically in his point of view, it might be a little more difficult to sell for if you're looking at romantic suspense. But as long as I would think the point of view or, you know, would bounce between the two, I would think it would sell equally as having a female.
Yep. Mary, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it could really work, especially if the heroine is a real mystery. If we can't get in her head and we have to see her through him, that helps. That kind of adds to the mystery. So, I mean, I think it could be a really interesting technique.
Nice. Cool. All right, now we might get into the PG-13 part of the presentation now, because I personally am someone, when I'm writing a novel and we get into the romantic part, I definitely like pan to the fireplace. You know, I just kind of like move away from it. So even if people are not looking to write romantic suspense, I think we're all interested in just how to bring in the heat level into our writing. How can we just get more comfortable with writing about human sexuality? Let's put it that way. So, do you guys have any tips for writers who are interested in bringing that aspect of writing into their novels? And how do you approach it in your own writing? Katie, let's start with you.
No, I'm still can sometimes approach a scene and go as a 10-year-old boy, you know, I don't like girls, I don't like boys, right? It's a little like, I don't know if I can write this down, right? Kind of thing. But then, I just push through it. It's just, if you can read it, you can write it. I enjoy reading it. So, I assume that there are people out there who get it and enjoy reading romantic and two people being intimate. But yeah, I mean, I think it's probably normal because we don't usually, it's not a daily thing when we sit down and write a romance scene or a scene where two people are being intimate. So there is a little bit of like, a little that little like, this is, maybe I shouldn't do this. You get over it, you push through it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mary, any thoughts?
I always look at the sex scenes. They have to have a bigger purpose than just the sex scene.
Yeah.
It has to have something to do with the emotions within the characters. It has to complicate the plot. It can't be, I don't like to see them as resolutions. They are, oh no, I can't believe we just did that. Now what are we going to do? Or it just kind of triggers something in one of the characters. And I come from a romance background. I started with historical romance, so I kind of got used to writing it. And I've kind of written the entire spectrum from fairly steamy to now not. Now we close the bedroom door and we don't see it because and that's what I've seen. That's been a trend in my writing. And it's whatever your readership is comfortable with. I mean, this gets back to knowing what your publisher's looking for, what your readers are looking for, because your name is kind of a brand. It's a promise. You know, I promise you it's going to be scary. I promise you it's going to be steamy. So it's kind of deciding what you want to project as a writer.
Sure. Okay. And Alexandra, how about you?
I like to use sex scenes almost as a break not a break in the action, I mean, because there's going to be action, but as a chance for everyone to catch their breath, you know,
Mhm.
and I usually put a little humor in it because that's the only place I really get to do that.
Mhm.
So, like the one I'm writing there, or the one I just wrote, they're in Wisconsin in a snowstorm, which is apropos. But so they're in a freezing cold, you know, cabin. So the humor comes from being against the freezing cold wall, naked, have, you know, so I try to bring those, and I then I can bring in the parts of the emotional journey with between the two of them. It's a good way, but I start my sex a lot earlier than the sex scene. You know, it's a brush of a finger down their
Yep.
back. It's you know, catching her when she, you know, so there's a lot of it along the way before the
So
action.
you're building up throughout the
Yeah,
novel
yeah.
to
So yeah, it's a touch here. It's a light kiss
Tension.
there. You know, putting.
Yeah.
I always say the most romantic thing that ever happened. I used to have super long hair, and it was always so hot. So when my husband would stand next to me, he always would put my hair up because he knew my neck was hot. So I find one little thing that he does for her, and I just plant it all the way through the book.
Mhm.
This might be a super dumb question, but is there a time in your novel where, and there's not going to be a right answer to this, but there could be sort of a theoretical answer to it. Is there a time in your novel, in your plotting, where it is good for those couples to come together in that way? Like, is 2/3 of the way through the novel a good time for that to happen, or anything like that?
I
Alexandra
I've
think
done it. Oh,
or
okay.
Mary? Mary,
I've
go
done
ahead.
it. I've done it. Everywhere in the book. I've
Yeah.
opened with it. I've ended with it. Um, it's usually when you've got serial killers and it's a police procedure. Sometimes it's just finding that moment to pause.
yeah.
But and you kind of know once you get into the story, you can tell. Okay, this really isn't a good time, or this is a good time for a break.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes you just don't know till you start to write it.
Yeah. And
I
I
mean, you
just
can
wanted to,
plot.
I was just going to add
Okay.
that I hate books where, you know, the serial killers like right on their trail and then they stop and have sex. And it's like, no one would ever do that.
I know.
Don't do that. So
Right.
like Mary said, you'll feel the time is right. But
Yeah,
Right.
make sure it fits in logically with the plot. I think that's a
Right.
good takeaway for all of
yeah.
us. Katie, anything to add?
No, I was just thinking it depends on the story for sure, but it also depends on that romantic arc too. So you're telling the suspense story, but you're also telling this romance story where, you know, if they in Pursuit of the Truth, the romantic leads have had secret crushes on each other. So the feelings are there, but they've not told each other. So you have to go through that sort of those steps that you are natural, and they don't have sex obviously until they've mentioned to each other that they kind of like each other. So you have to do certain things to build up to that, and it some of it comes naturally depending on where you start the couple in their romantic journey.
Sure. Yeah.
And if I could just add one thing, the sex isn't necessarily the love commitment. It can be, but I think once the characters declare their love or their intentions for each other, I do that on the last page, because
Uh-huh.
I think once you've done that, regardless of where, first page, middle of book, readers are starting to go, wow, okay, it's done. And so you don't want to give that verbal emotional commitment till the very last page, like as they're
Yeah.
walking off stage in the epilogue, because I think readers just kind of they start to distance themselves from the book at that point, because
Okay.
that's another suspense element of your suspense novel.
Yeah.
When
Oh,
are they, or
interesting.
will they?
Yeah. So use the love as part of
Yeah.
the suspense and it's part of the
Exactly.
tension. Oh, great.
And it can also be that one is ready when another isn't, and when the other love interest isn't, and then it flips. And in my current manuscript, I have the male love interest his interest, not his love, because they just met, but his interest in pursuing a relationship early, and the female says, I'm not interested in you. And then throughout the book, she kind of becomes interested, but because she has told him no, he's backed away, right? So now they've come together, they come apart, they come together, they come apart.
Mm-hmm.
Different things are keeping them at different times from being at the same place romantically.
Oh, nice. Good. These are all such awesome tips for adding like layers of suspense to a novel, like far away from the murder. It's just I think we
Mm-hmm.
can, all crime writers can learn from this. This is awesome. So can we talk? Let's talk a little bit. Mary, I'm going to start with you on this one. Let's talk a little bit about the villains in your story. What do you look for in a villain? How do you are there multiple villains? Like, how do you approach that aspect of plotting and creating a novel?
Yeah, I've had some books where I've had several that are villains that are kind of working and coordinating together. But the villain, I think, is the most important character in the romantic suspense, because without him or her, there's no story. There might be a romance, but chances are the hero and heroine wouldn't have gotten together because the villain's not doing his thing. And I always try to find something I like about the villain. Something I try to get them to do something that might even be kind or helpful at some point in the book. You know, granted, they're doing these things for their own reasons, but the reader might not know that. But it's finding reasons why they are the way they are. Are they just plain up psychotic, or were they wrongly sent to prison 10 years ago? Were they grew up in an abusive home? I mean, I'm trying to add layers to them that so they're not that mustache twirling villain from the 1920 movies. So I'm trying to make them fully developed people that might love their dogs, might keep their grass cut well. I mean, there's just I don't want you to see them coming, I guess,
Yep.
is my big approach to villains.
So follow-up question, and this is from one of the viewer questions. Mary, I think you mentioned earlier that sometimes you have you have POV, you have your villains have POV scenes, yes?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
when you do that, do you reveal to your reader that that person is the villain, or do you
No, I mean they're in their own head. They're talking I. I can do the I point of view. Just because he can see her, doesn't necessarily mean she can see him. There's all kinds of ways around it that you don't even have to reveal the sex of the villain. I've done that before where, you kind of think, oh, this must be a guy. And then at the end you realize, no, it was a woman.
Uh-huh.
But those scenes often take a lot of rewrites, so you can watch your pronoun shifts and your point of view shifts, but you can reveal a lot about a character without revealing their identity.
Yep. Nice.
Because remember, that internal world they have is probably pretty separated from the real world. So they might be seeing things that aren't even real. I mean, you can have a lot of fun with your villains.
Mm-hmm. Good. So Alexander, tell us about one of your villains and sort of how you developed the character from the ground up. This is hard to do without giving away the plot of a novel, but
But I think, like Mary, I spend a lot of time on the villain too. And the main thing for me is that they morally think they're right. I mean, they don't think they're evil. I mean, they may hate what they do, but they have a sense of belief that they are right, that they're doing, that they have their own set of morals and their own ethical code that they follow. So one of them I did was a copycat killer. She wrote a book on criminals, and so he was obsessed with her. And then she had wrote a book about all these serial killers. So he was performing the deaths to impress her. So everything he was doing was out of love in his head. So and a lot of times I like to add in the victims. I
Mhm.
give a point of view to the victims. So I have them as real people who, you get to meet and see until the very last minute of their death. So I like to get all of that part involved too.
Nice. So, Katie, as you've been developed, so you've written your first book. Have you finished a follow up as well?
I've finished the first three.
Oh, okay.
The complete West series.
Yeah.
And started a second series with Harlequin.
So tell us
those
a little
are
bit
coming
about,
down coming down the pike.
Oh, awesome. Good for you. Tell us a little bit about the villains in those first three books. How are they different from each other, and what did they do to inform the story, I guess?
So all in the West Securities, all the villains are they're not psychos, right? They're normal people who have decided for whatever reason that this is the course they're going to take. It's not technically legal, but for whatever reason, they are in the right to do this thing. So they're the average guy that's making bad decisions, basically, and that sort of based on the plot too, right? It's not a serial killer plot. It's not a thriller, a hardcore thriller. So that's sort of where we're starting from, and that goes back to kind of knowing your publisher, what your publisher wants, what your readers want. I'm writing in the Harlequin intrigue line, so it's not the thrills are not too gory or too thrilling.
Yeah.
It's not too hardcore.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that, and I'll start with you, Katie, because you're the one who just did this most recently. But knowing what your publisher wants, so we've got a lot of new writers in the audience, a lot of people who are trying to break in. How did you break into in with Harlequin, and how did you know how to target Harlequin intrigue, or did you know to target Harlequin intrigue? And then for Mary and Alexandra, as you think about this, think about how would authors today break into romantic suspense, and how might it differ from when you did? So Katie, you can start.
Yeah. So I wrote Pursuit of This Truth first, without really knowing if I was going to publish it, where I would publish it, who I would publish it with. And as I was writing, I've read enough of Harlequin intrigue. I'm a big Harlequin intrigue reader to kind of know that it would fit, or to think at least that it would fit. And so I went and looked. All of Harlequin's different lines have their submission requirements and what they look for in that particular line. It's on their website. So I looked on the website and I thought, yeah, this will be a good fit for intrigue. So you can do that for Harlequin and a couple of the other I know Entangled. It's also a romance. Publishes a lot of romance. They also have what they want in their different lines right on their website. So for me, that's how that worked. I just knew they would fit in this line, and part of that, like I said, came from reading, which you really should do. Read a lot if you're interested in a particular line. Tons, read tons of books from that line to kind of get a feel for what the editors in that line look for, what they want, what they like, what the readers like. So that's really how I did it.
Great. So Mary, if for new readers trying to break into romance or romantic suspense, what would you suggest?
When the conferences were open, and like 2 years ago, I would have suggested, if you have a conference that's like, look at the conference lineup and see who's going to be there and do they fit your needs. Are you going to learn something? Are you going to meet somebody? And then go and then sign up for appointments and make a point to introduce yourself. I mean, that's how I did it. These days, a lot of it can be done online. You can go to the agents. You can, because I always looked at it as a two-prong approach. I was going after editors and I was going after agents. And I figured if I got one or the other, I would solve the other side of the equation. But that's how I went into an interview. It was a group interview. My first book came out in 2000. And I went into a group interview in the late 90s with an editor or with an agent. And I'd always been taught when you go into an interview, have a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, this is really going to date me, but there were 158 book distributors in the United States, and they had just been whittled down to 7 book distributors. And my question was, how's this going to change the market? And so
Yeah.
that kind of got the ball rolling. But as you're engaging with these editors online now and agents, you've really got to have a sharp query letter. And I suggest, they have books at the library and online that'll teach you how to do this, but you could spend days on a query letter and a synopsis because that's your calling card. And sometimes that might be your first and only shot.
Mm-hmm.
So these days, that's where I'd put my energy, into those sharp query letters and synopsis. So you can make it's your first handshake. It's your first impression.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you use the word interview there, because it's almost like it is a job interview as you're going in to meet with agents and you're querying yours. Just treat it just like you would with any job. Go in and present your.
And remember, you're interviewing them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're so anxious to be chosen. You have to ask yourself, can I work with this person? Is this a I was looking for somebody I could have a long-term relationship with, help me grow and branch out, because I knew I liked category at the time. I really enjoyed writing it, but I knew I'd want something different. I know myself well enough to know I'd want to try something different. So I was looking for an agent that would grow. But again, look for those. If you're not comfortable with the agent, you need to ask yourself, maybe this isn't a good fit for you.
Yep.
Kind of go in there, you got to look out for yourself.
Yep. Good. Alexandra, how about you? What advice would you
Can I
give?
just add to that?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to add to Mary's point, because she made a good one. I got my contract with Harlequin before I had an agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because I knew what I wanted, I knew what this book would do, and I knew Harlequin, you didn't need to have an agent, but that helped me to get an agent, right? To refine the query letters, to do the synopsis, and all that was required to submit to Harlequin helped me when I had another manuscript that was more a hard-boiled thriller, and I submitted it to the agent. I had already been through the process a little bit first. So I think sometimes new authors think, if I don't have an agent, it's, that's it, I won't get published. There are other ways to do it, right? You can go directly to, there are publishers who will allow you to come directly to them. So think about that too.
Mm-hmm.
There's no straight line to being published. Not all of them, right? But
yeah, but they will tell you.
Do your research.
Tell you on their website. So look, if they don't need an agent, then you can submit directly.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
Alexandra, anything to add?
I mean, I think they covered the basic of doing that. The only thing I would add besides read,
Yep.
and don't, assume that it's going to be easy because it's Harlequin or because it's what I'm saying. That's some of the hardest to write, but
They are.
I would suggest that you always learn.
Yep.
I'm 88 books. I don't really old, but I just signed up for masterclass and I love it. I love
nice.
the new, and every day I learn something new and I work to get better every single day. And I think sometimes we're so anxious to get started in a career that it's going to take a while to get published. Make sure it's your best. Make sure it's polished. Make sure it's something you would like to see, because you really have one shot of introducing yourself to these people and you want it to be your very best. And even if you do get an agent or publish, always learn, stay learning, because it keeps everything fresh and exciting and new challenges for you. But I've loved, like you said, going to conferences. I love to go and see, new people and hear their experience. I love to do these so I can hear how other people, but always be learning, always be getting better.
Nice. That's great advice. I'm just going to look through there are lots of questions from audiences. We've answered many of them. And I'm just going to scan through them for 1 second. So one question, this was my last question. What trends do you see in romantic suspense? If someone's really trying to break in here, and chasing trends is not always the best idea, because sometimes you chase a trend and by the time you catch it, it's gone. But what trends do you see in romantic suspense that authors might want to look into right now? And let's start with Mary. Yep.
Okay, I would say I've seen the heroines get much stronger. We've kind of touched on that. You're starting to see more psychological, domestic suspense. So you can still have those romantic elements because it used to be, you know, like a mystery romance, but you're seeing now more suspense thrillers. But I would say I'm seeing more domestic and psychological types of suspense. It's just a different. It's all the same. It's just the different way you press the buttons in the novel. So it's, you know, is the neighbor really a stalker, or is, you know, you're seeing more psychological and domestic. You're just seeing more of that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you don't like to read it, and it's not your cup of tea, don't write it, because it's going to show.
Katie, what are you seeing for trends?
Exactly what Mary's saying. The trend is going into psychological. What are thinking? What's behind the actions, and not just action on the page. So you know, that's a very big trend right now. But then, you know, as you mentioned, who knows what it'll be a year or two from now. So if you don't like it, if you don't like writing that, don't write it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There are readers for everything.
Mm-hmm.
They really are. So, you know, write what you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Alexandra, trends, and then I have a follow-up. Do you write a series? Any series, romantic suspense series?
Not suspense, but I write a series for paranormal.
Does anyone here write a series with the same love interest in the series?
I haven't. I've had like siblings, and I will connect 4 books that way, where 2 people, you know, characters, a secondary becomes primary in another, but not. It seems for me, romantic suspense, that has not. It's been better for me just to write the standalones.
Okay, we have a couple questions about series, but and how to sort of maintain romance through a series. But it sounds like you haven't.
That's tough.
That. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's tough. If you write cozy mysteries, which are huge right now, you do see continuing characters quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you start to see that romance arc go over several books versus 1 book, which it works. I mean, it can work.
Yeah. And a lot of romantic suspense readers want to see the couple get together at the end. So if you did use the same 2 people, you'd have to find a way to then have a break them up or something happen in the second book so that they could come together again at the end. It's a little bit tricky when you're using the same people, but like Mary, the West Investigation series is 4 brothers. So each book takes for 3 of the brothers. The 4th one is off somewhere. I don't know what he's doing right now. He doesn't have a book.
Cool. Okay, so this is from an audience member too. So Alexandra, and I'll go around again. Alexandra, what support network do you have for your writing? Do you have a writers group or beta readers? Who do you look to as you're writing your novels?
It was really hard for me. I live in a rural area, so there was no writers groups. There was no, you know, so I wrote a long time and even got published with no real support. But I did join Romance Writers of America, so that at least started to give me some idea of the business part of it. But it's nice now because you can be online. And so I have found, and I've met most people in person first at conferences. And I think that's the beauty of once we're able to go back is, you know, do book signings or conferences and then meet people. And then I can stay connected then online. But most of the time it's just to remind me to get busy and hold each other accountable most of all. So, but for me, it's just online.
And Mary, how about you?
When I first started, I joined a writer's critique group. I'd met 3 other gals through Virginia Romance Writers, and we met every Friday. And that was great for me because in a time when I wasn't sold, it set those deadlines for me.
Yep.
And we would sit at my kitchen table once a week and swap chapters, and then we'd talk about them. And we did that for years. These days, it's just me. The Sisters in Crime group here is great, and we're meeting online right now, but we've had some terrific in-person meetings. And I haven't been to any major conferences in a couple of years now. But yeah, it's just me and the 3 dachshunds. Yeah, it's just us.
And Katie, how about you?
I've been to a couple of conferences, and then like everyone else, everything went online. So I'm a part of several writers groups, Romance Writers of America, International Thriller Writers, Crime Writers of Color. So it does help to keep you accountable, right there. And then there's subgroups within those groups. So that's great. And you have found critique partners there and beta readers and all of those groups. But writing is somewhat of a solitary career, right? Mm-hmm. You got to sit down and you got to do it on your own, and there's nobody there typing for you or holding the pencil. So it's pretty much the same here as everywhere else.
Cool, thank you. I've just got a couple more questions from audience participants. So just, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. So Alexandra, you had said earlier that that the suspense is the more difficult part of the writing for you. I guess that this question is asking, how do you work to tighten up the suspense as you're working through your novels and make sure that the novel has that tension throughout? And I guess that would be for everyone. But Alexandra, why don't you start?
All right, that really is hard. I mean, because I tend to get a little wordy. So I started off actually as a theater major. So I started off as a playwright. So I write my book actually in play format. So I write the dialogue all the way through so that it goes at this breakneck pace all the way through. And then I go back in and I layer in the action. I layer in the points of view from the villain and from the victims. And then I go back through and I layer in the emotion. So I write like no one, I mean, like a ridiculous way to write, but that way I can make sure of the pacing. So mine are kind of like, I couldn't write a domestic psychological one because mine are just like breakneck speed, as fast as it possibly can go. So I think it depends on your pacing too. Yep. And I love to read domestic thrillers, but I can't write that way. So I think it's kind of depends on your voice and and how you want your story to go.
Yep. Katie, anything to add to that?
No, I mean it sounds a little bit similar. I always think writing is a iterative process. So I do focus the first time through the first draft a lot more on dialogue than anything else. So similar, but then I go back through and look at the settings and the description and emotion and that sort of thing in the second and third drafts. So it is a layering of all the different things. I can't imagine anybody could write 300 pages all the way through the first time and hit all the different things you're trying to hit in a novel. I can't imagine anybody could do that.
Yeah, I mean, so each of you has. What I'm hearing is each of you has your own system, and one of the things about writing is figuring out what system works for you. And there are lots of different ways to approach something. Anything to add, Mary?
One trick I learned back in the day when I was trying to figure out if the pacing was working, I printed the book out and put it in a binder and then just gave it a couple of days and then read it like a reader. And if I'm getting bored, chances are my reader is going to be getting bored. So that was my cue to say, I became the editor. It's almost like a switch.
Yeah.
And I could knock out huge paragraphs.
Yeah.
So you read it, if you read it on paper, you'll see it differently.
Yeah. Well, and I'll give a plug. We had a session maybe 2 weeks ago that Jess Lowry gave. It's available on the website for any members who are on. And she really taught. She gave a master class in pacing that I'd highly recommend anyone listening to if you haven't been able to see it yet. Lots of really good tips for how to approach pacing. One question we got from a couple people is, how do you get your book read out loud? I do it through Adobe Acrobat. There's just and you can search online on how to do this. Just search on how to have Adobe Acrobat read your book out loud, and it'll tell you how to do it. I think you can also do it through Word. It just sounds like a computer reading to you. So it's like a very flat monotone, but it really does help in hearing the words. So just search online and you'll be able to find the answer on how to do that. I want to thank our
mine
panel.
myself.
You create yours yourself?
No, I just read it out loud myself from the computer. I found that works better. I've tried Microsoft Word too, but eventually my mind starts to wander. But if I'm reading it myself, then I stay right. The still going, and I've completely stopped listening. But if I'm reading it myself, I'll hear, oh, did I really mean that? I'll catch the word repetition is a big thing for me too. It's like I said guilty like 4 times, you know, in this last paragraph. So you can just do that. I mean, I
highly recommend doing exactly what Katie just said and reading your own work to yourself as well. So I want to thank our panelists. This was such an awesome session. Thank you so much for your time and your great advice. I learned a ton today. I have a couple final words to say from Sisters in Crime, and that they are, thanks everyone for joining us. Sisters in Crime, the Sisters in Crime Education Committee and our presenters are always working to improve our programming. So please complete a short feedback survey you'll receive by email with regard to this webinar. Members of Sisters in Crime can view this webinar and a library of recorded webinars by visiting the Sisters in Crime website. I'll just add that to the chat. There are a bunch of webinars up there, including the one I just mentioned from Jess Lowry. If you're not a member of Sisters in Crime and want to join, click on the Join tab when you go to the site, and you can learn about the benefits of membership and pay online. We have both national and local chapters. So thank you all. I'll add the website into the chat in just a second. But thank you, presenters, for joining me today. This was great. And I hope we all get to go out to conferences and meet each other in person someday soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.